Hello everyone. Welcome to our APUSH periods 1, 2, and 3. As I'm falling over in my chair here, sorry about that. I'm going to try to make these review PowerPoints a little shorter. I'll have a lot of writing up there on the PowerPoints, and I'm not going to sit there and just read them to you. You can always pause it, look at it, reflect on what it has to say. Take note of the things that I'm underlining. Those are concepts that are in the key concepts that are actual main ideas. Sometimes they're content and things that you really do need to know. It'll also help you when you try to make some flashcards or some other review device that you come up on your own. Also, I want to show you something here. I've added something new. Essential questions, and I must admit I got this from another AP teacher. But I think they're good. They'll help us focus on each of these periods, anywhere from 3 to 5 specific essential questions that basically the answers will answer what the key concepts are about. So here in period 1, how did the Columbian Exchange affect North America, Europe, and Africa? How did cultural contact challenge the identities and value systems of peoples of the Americas, Europe, and Africa? Now, those are two concepts you could probably answer at this point in time. We've gone over a lot of this. And again, here are some of the key concepts specifically. Now, again, take note of the fact when the dates of these periods. In your notes, if you're making yourself flashcards or notes or something else to help you review, think of the time periods as well as the period itself. Here we are, 1497 to 1607. Here's the Columbian Exchange. It's right there in the key concepts. The idea of maize, a huge population growth that takes place in Europe because of the Columbian Exchange, and examples. Examples are things that you can use when writing essays, short answers, DBQs. These are specific content things that aren't necessarily in the key concepts, but help describe what we're talking about. For instance, the word epidemic is in the key concept. The major epidemic of the time period was smallpox, so that sort of thing. And period 1 is a pretty quick one, and that's why I'm giving a little bit more explanation there, because this is all you're going to see here really of period 1. Let's go to period 2. All right, we have essential questions here as well. How and why did slavery develop in the British colonies? Right? Our key concepts answer that. Again, something hopefully we've gone over this quite a bit now in the last couple of weeks of review. You probably answer these questions on your own. What factors shaped the development of Native American society after contact with Europeans? How were changing religious ideas, Enlightenment beliefs, and Republican perspectives influenced by the Atlantic World Exchange? And how did these ideals and beliefs shape colonial identity, politics, culture, and society? And again, using certain words that are actually in the key concepts, like Enlightenment, for instance, in the essential questions, helps to focus what it is you need to think about in order to answer these questions and thereby truly understand these periods. So let's get a little bit more into period 2. 1607 to 1754. I've referred to this as colonial period. And again, we've gone over some of these in class. You have your review packets at home. A fur trade was the major trade that gets established. There are other Europeans here, not just the English, Spanish, French, and Dutch. And they had different aspects of how they wanted to treat the colonies, how they wanted to treat the Native Americans. Take note of the fact that the Spanish, the French, and the Dutch actually accept intermarriage. It says, unlike Spanish, French, and Dutch, who accepted intermarriage, cross-racial sexual unions with native peoples, the English did not, right? So that's a way to differentiate how the English are treating native populations and culture in the Americas and the other European powers. The Chesapeake is a major part of period 2. A tobacco economy, right? These were men who went there looking for gold, looking for some other way of economically creating wealth for themselves. And when they couldn't find that, eventually tobacco was discovered, and they created this economy here based on this particular cash crop agricultural product. It's obviously very labor intensive. It began with indentured servitude in the early 1600s, but by 1700, by the end of the century, Atlantic slave trade, black slavery comes in. There are certain reasons that takes place, one of which is Bacon's Rebellion, and that's going to be in the examples I'll show you in a moment. Of course, the British, this is all part of their system. They wanted to continue this system of even enslaved Africans in perpetuity. I don't even think I said it right even there. I apologize to all you scholars out there. This alters African gender and kinship relationships in the colonies. But this also, because the Americans are not exactly getting along with each other. I keep saying Americans, the British, really. The British at this time aren't all getting along with one another. This eventually leads with violent confrontations with the native peoples. And one example I'll show you is King Philip's War. Of course, the Puritans in New England, remember they were much more organized when they came over as a colony. They knew exactly what they were doing. They came to build their utopia, their city upon a hill, influenced by the Enlightenment. As you see, that was in the essential question. They also had stronger ideas about self-government. Of course, the middle colonies are the most diverse of all these colonies, more demographically, more religiously, more ethnically. Their economy is based on cereal crops, not just a single cash crop. They are going to grow grain and corn and wheat. Of course, the Chesapeakes and North Carolina, again, there's a second time there that's in the concepts. It tells you they cultivate tobacco. Labor intensive, indentured servitude. They mentioned this more than once now in the concept, so obviously that's something very important for you to take note of when you're studying this. Of course, as we talked about earlier, there's multiple European powers here. A lot of small wars are going to be fought in the 1600s going into the 1700s because of the various rivalries. Of course, it culminates with the outbreak in 1754 of the 7 Years' War in Europe. Of course, 1753, it begins in America as the French-Indian War. The economic system is mercantilist. It's a mercantilist economic policy that they're using. Of course, the British had not a lot of success enforcing this. They tried with such laws as navigation laws, but colonists continued to smuggle. And of course, the British government eventually grows indifferent to this smuggling, salutary neglect, because they realize that the colonists do need coin in order to help the mercantile system work. You've got to be able to buy the British-made products, and so they do allow the smuggling then. So again, here are some examples that could be used for period 2. Head right system goes right into the indentured servitude. House of Burgesses, the first elected body in the Americas. Bacon's Rebellion was the indentured servant rebellion. Nathaniel Bacon himself, not indentured servant, but using this as an opportunity perhaps to gain power in Virginia. Maryland Toleration Act, Mayflower Compact, City upon a Hill. These are things that we've studied quite a bit in class. You can look up these various terms yourself. I would make some flashcards on these. But make sure you label them as examples, things that you could use if you're writing an essay, short answers, DBQ. King Philip's War. That might be a good one for you to look up. That's a massive war that takes place between the New England colonists in 1676 and the Native Americans in that area. It's their last big push, the Indians in that area, to try to rid them of the English. It's a very, very bloody war, and some would say one of the bloodiest wars actually in all of the Americas is the King Philip's War. Of course, the English obviously wind up winning that. That might be one that you might want to make sure that you look up and you can use that as an example. All right, period 3. So how did democratic and republican ideals and emerging conceptions of American identity lead to the Declaration of Independence? the development of American political institutions. How did democratic and republican ideals and emerging conceptions of American identity affect the development and success of the Articles of Confederation? How did these factors affect the development and ratification of the Constitution? How and why did the first majority party system develop in the early republic? So again, these are great essential questions. You can use these as the basis of your, I keep using the example as flashcards because I know a lot of you like to make those or whatever it is, and then you can plug in the various concepts in order to answer these particular questions. So again, here's a lot of writing here, but you can just pause this at this moment and take some notes if you want to. Again, there were various Indian alliances. That's always important to take note of that was taking place, which led eventually to the French-Indian War. England goes into debt, which led it to raise obviously more taxes in America in order to pay for this debt, and that becomes the catalyst. Of course, the Stamp Act is the one major example that we use for this, but there are other taxes, the Townshend Acts, eventually what's known as the Intolerable Acts. Of course, your concepts tell you that this was an independence movement that was fueled by established colonial elites as well as grassroots movements. So you had the elites, your Jeffersons, your Washingtons, your John and Sam Adams, but you also had groups of men, Minutemen, Sons of Liberty, you had women, you had certain free blacks who were not of the elites, but they were also willing to partake in this as well. Thomas Paine's common sense. Thomas Paine is mentioned in the concepts. Thomas Jefferson's name is not, and I think that's a crime if you ask me. The author of Declaration of Independence, but again, highly influenced by the Enlightenment. These two documents, one is a pamphlet, the other one a document or Declaration of Independence, really outline what American identity is eventually going to become and how it's different than British citizenship. Of course, this is all in the backdrop of the American Revolution. During this time period, they build their own new government known as the Articles of Confederation, one that's basically state-centered power, I would call it, state-centered, states' rights, a very weak, if at all, central government because they feared what the king was in England, and they didn't want to have that here, so they gave the states all the power. Of course, this thing would continue on after the American Revolution, but not very long. Eventually, they'll realize they'll have to replace it with a more permanent, stronger government, which brought up all this debate between central power versus states' rights. Again, this is in our key concepts, and eventually they get a constitution. But it's also based, the Constitution didn't just come out of nowhere. A major compromise is the 3/5 compromise, the issue of slavery that comes out of this. Of course, one good thing, and this is kind of out here in nowhere's land, and it really should have had it next to the Articles of Confederation. Make sure you take note, this is a law that was passed under the Articles. It's one of the really good laws that the Articles of Confederation passed. Not only setting a stage for how territories eventually become state, but it also outlawed slavery in the Northwest. The first law in America to outlaw slavery is the Northwest Ordinance. Of course, the Constitution continues much debate, issues on economic policy, who has more power, the state or the national government, who gets to conduct foreign affairs. This will be a debate that will continue on into the 19th century, domestic and foreign policy. Eventually, two political parties emerge over interpretation of the Constitution. One is a strict interpretation, which would be the Jeffersonian Republicans, and a more loose interpretation with Alexander Hamilton's Federalist Party. It's Hamilton's economic policies, by the way, that eventually led to the formation of political parties. Now, that's an example, but it's something important to note. George Washington, our first of 6 presidents that's named in the concepts, and of course, he's named for his farewell address, where he warns of political parties and alliances with Europe. The alliance he was most afraid of is that with the French. The French were going through the French Revolution. He declared neutrality during this time period. Of course, Washington, then John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and then finally James Madison. These presidents, all in a row, will all have to deal with the French Revolution and eventually culminate in the War of 1812 with America versus Great Britain, of all things. So again, as America now is becoming the America we know with a constitution, trade is very important. Navigation of the Mississippi River is extremely important, which led into conflict with Spain because Spain controlled or owned the Mississippi River. Various diplomatic initiatives will be taken. There's Pinckney's Treaty with the Spanish. There's Jay's Treaty with the British. Because there's still conflict with the British after the American Revolution. They won't leave Ohio. Indian conflict is still taking place. Of course, again, here's the Enlightenment yet again, and this time it's expressing how women are affected with this concept of the Republican motherhood, calling all white women to maintain and teach Republican values within the family, which put women, and it's an important thing to note, gave women a new importance in American political culture, their Republican motherhood. And here are some major events. I was changing that in all of them. I guess I forgot to change it there. It should be say not major events, but examples. French Indian War, the Proclamation Act is that imaginary line that they drew along the Appalachian Mountains after the French Indian War. Stamp Act, Sons of Liberty. These are, again, good things for you to take time to look up and see if you can learn some of these as good examples that you could use if you were given an essay on one of this. Maybe there's an essay that comes out of period 3, and here are some examples that you would want to use. As I mentioned earlier, Hamilton's financial plan, where he wants to create the Bank of the United States, assumption of all debt, and have a tariff to protect industry. That's what eventually sets off Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and they create political parties out of this. XYZ affair, Alien Sedition Act, Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, also very good things to look up and have in your wheelhouse for potential essay background information for you. Alrighty, well that's it. Have a good night. We'll talk again soon.